Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm well, thanks for asking.
And it is really a pleasure to have you. I want to start off, though, with getting a definition of what is autism.
So, autism is a neurodevelopmental condition. What this means is that it affects a person's ability to form relationships with others on the social aspect of the condition. But it also affects someone's sensory processing, so their ability to receive and process information from the outside world.
And looking at even before we get to autism during the pandemic, possibly in Trinidad and Tobago, when you hear someone or someone is diagnosed with autism, what are some of those challenges? Is it just from autism itself or just getting the news? I am or my child is autistic. What are some of those challenges?
So, when someone is initially diagnosed, this usually happens within a child's first 2 years of life. Usually and ideally, it would happen very early on so that intervention can become a more prominent part of care. In terms of receiving a diagnosis, I mean, many parents speak about an experience of grief, just the thought of, what they would have seen their child's life pan out to be for the future, and having to come to terms with a very different reality once a diagnosis is part of the picture.
What are those, you said 1 to 2 years normally is the first or second year that diagnosis is normally, it takes place. But what are some of those things that would make a parent or a caregiver say, I think I want to carry my child in to see whether or not there's a diagnosis of autism to be had?
So that's where the developmental aspect of autism comes into play, because usually in the first few years of life, there are many stages of development that a child undergoes, from forming relationships with parents to learning how to walk, how to talk. So usually within those first 2 years, a parent may notice that their child is struggling with some aspects of development. It could be some challenges with being able to kind of move their body in space. So having a good sense of balance or having a good sense of movement. For others, it might be a challenge with verbal communication, which oftentimes is a significant red flag for parents. When their child isn't forming words, isn't responding to their name. And another red flag might be around sensory processing. So for example, the child is sensitive to sound or light. They may also have sensitivity to textures, including food or even clothing.
Looking at these things, you say red flags, going in, getting a diagnosis. I want to reach out to the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago because I've just had this diagnosis for my friend, a loved one, child, and I'm going through these stages of grief. What is the process of engaging the society?
So we often get a lot of parents trying to get in touch with us actually regarding diagnosis, which is something that we don't particularly offer because this has to be done by a trained professional. Usually a psychologist who has done the relevant training to diagnose autism, sometimes by a psychiatrist or a neurodevelopmental pediatrician. So those are the go-to persons for a diagnosis. Now, once a diagnosis happens, they are often referred to our organization for further support and care. And this is where we meet with parents individually, where we get an idea of what are some of their particular needs, because it's unique for every person, and we help the family to form support and care around the child. What this may mean for us can be in terms of parent training, in terms of having the child join a group to form social interactions or social relationships. What it may also mean is to support the family around other types of support For example, a child may be learning how to potty train, and that might be very important for their future schooling. So we offer different types of services depending on that individual's needs.
And I appreciate the fact that you spoke about training for parents, because one of the things I can see is a parent receiving a diagnosis like this and all the plans that you were talking about, that you were intimating, saying, okay, well, I want my child to do this and I want my child to do that. They just take those plans and almost like lock them away in a box. Is it a matter of trying to expand horizons for that parent again and saying that so many things are possible? What do you mean when you say parent training?
So our parent training focuses on helping parents to support their children. One of the things about an autism diagnosis is that, people often see it specifically as a disability or the child being unable to do things. But what we like to kind of promote is the idea that oftentimes it's our society that is unable to support their specific needs. Because a child with autism can learn, they can grow, they can become educated, they can hold jobs if they receive the right support. And support is a key component of someone being successful. So for our parent training, we help parents to kind of rethink how they would have typically gone about parenting in terms of, we don't promote punitive measures. We try to encourage parents to really, follow their child's interests, to kind of learn how to communicate best with them. And so they are able to form a closer bond, a closer relationship that the parent may oftentimes feel as though they may have lost a little bit because the child isn't speaking or because the child isn't, overtly affectionate.
All right, and we continue this conversation when we return. And one of the things I want to look at as soon as we return is long-term and short-term care options available in this country. We're speaking about autism with the PRO of the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago, Sarah Soo Hon. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Depth with me, Dike Rostant. We are discussing autism and specifically autism in Trinidad and Tobago. We're doing this with the PRO of the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago, Sarah Soo Hon. And just before we took the break, I was trying to point us in the direction of long-term and short-term care options available in this country. What is there available, Sarah?
So that's a really interesting question, because oftentimes that's an area that we often advocate for, because long-term and even short-term options are very limited. It's very unfortunate, actually. In terms of short-term care, it depends on, how the child presents and what their current needs are. So for example, some children can be supported to integrate into a very neurotypical classroom. Others might need additional supports which are currently unavailable in the neurotypical classroom setting. And so that family may be interested in some form of special education or special care. And those are available, very limited within the public sector and more available in a private setting. Oftentimes there's a very significant cost attached. And in terms of long-term care, this is an interesting area because, oftentimes people associate autism with childhood illness or childhood condition. And the reality is that children with autism grow into adults with autism, and so there are very limited areas of support for a person like that. At our society, we do have an adult group, which we have every week to help support our adults with autism who did not receive adequate care or did not get opportunities to further their education. And so there's a lot more that can be done in terms of supporting adults to become employable, to gain the skills that they might need in order to contribute well to society. And the thing is that many of our adults, if they did receive that type of support in their youth, their younger days, even as adults, if there were more opportunities for them to explore employment, maybe with the flexibility that they might need, it could be very possible that many of them can be employed successfully. But this is an area that is underexplored, I think, in Trinidad.
And Sarah, if this was an academic paper, one of the key words would have been support. And so even before we get into looking at helping individuals prepare for adulthood, what has the situation been like during the pandemic, trying to make that support available for individuals with autism? Because one of the things that I understand is that a routine is very important.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, what has the feedback been in terms of like people reaching out to the society and saying that their experience has been during the pandemic, helping to support an individual who has autism?
Well, like many other organizations, this pandemic has really turned us all different directions. You know, we've had to really sit down and think about how we can continue services safely and as efficiently as possible. So like many other organizations, we have tried to make the most of a virtual platform. One of the main things that we have done is that we have transitioned a lot of our group work into a virtual setting, and this is to support the health and safety of staff and especially of our children who are quite vulnerable. You know, some of our kids do have comorbidities, and so we are very careful about, you know, kind of adhering to COVID protocols in order to support them. But again, this has meant moving to a virtual platform, which has its pros and cons for our kids. You know, some kids are very much interested in that online space, and so they have been able to adapt well, you know, especially for those who may have had mobility issues and coming to the center would have been difficult before. For some of them, it's been easier. But for others, it's been a challenge because we do have children who need that physical sensory input that you can't have on a virtual setting. And so for those kids, you know, they have not been able to benefit as much from this virtual platform. Now, moving into this phase of the pandemic for us, we have kind of experimented with having both in-person situations where possible. So for example, if it might have been just individual meetings or individual sessions, we've been trying to facilitate that, as well as sticking to the virtual platforms more for the group settings. So we've had to kind of use both to kind of support our families. Another key aspect of this pandemic for us has been the significant change in funding. And again, this is something that I know is not unique to our organization's experience, where, you know, belts are tighter. People have had to kind of not have as much flexibility as they would have had before in terms of supporting and donating and, you know, funding organizations. We have been very beneficial from, you know, being able to receive care and support from the Ministry of Health through a subvention, which has been amazing. It's helped us to kind of keep our feet on the ground. But, you know, for our organization, we also depend a lot on donations, and so that has been a significant challenge for us.
And with those donations, how, if people wanted to contact the society, be it to say, okay, well, I have a child who I believe is autistic, can you point me in the directions that you think I should go? Or what do you need? Because we have done work before and I see what it is you're doing. Or they're just even looking at this conversation, so they're hearing about the society for the first time. How do they contact the society? How do they help? How do they engage? Take me through that process.
So there are different ways in which we can be contacted. You could find us very easily on Facebook at Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago. You can also find us on Instagram, Autistic Society of TT. You can contact us via telephone at 646-5506. You can send us an email at autismtt@gmail.com. So there are various ways in which you can contact us, and our staff are always able to answer questions for anyone who's interested in finding out about the services we have available. If you're interested in donating, we do have a hamper drive coming up in the second week of December, and so if you are interested in donating towards that cause, definitely get in touch with us and we will certainly direct you on how you can help.
All right, and we have just about 2 minutes more in this conversation, but there are two questions I want to ask. Children turn into adults. Yeah. Helping children with autism prepare for adulthood is one thing, and also in closing arguments, what is the one takeaway you'd want someone to have from this conversation?
So, helping children with this transition into adulthood is not an individual task. It takes a community of support. And I think this is also the one takeaway I want people to have, is the idea that it's not just, about them and their issues. It's about us taking up the responsibility to support people in our community to have a better life, to be able to contribute equally to our economy. It's about having everyone be able to feel employable, to have the confidence to go out there and to work just like anyone else. And I think it's really important to focus on community support because, again, as a society of, parents, it was started by parents, it's transitioned into much more than that, but it's been a community supporting each other. And we really want the wider community of Trinidad and Tobago to, join in with us as other communities and other organizations who are able to support each other.
In terms of that community supporting each other, does the society share success stories? Because it's one thing for someone to feel, okay, well, they're alone in this by themselves. It's another to say, hey, somebody else did it already. So I can do it, we can do it, my child can do it. Do you all share things like that as well?
We do from time to time. It really depends on, people's comfort level. But, we've had many members come through our society who have been able to integrate into a neurotypical classroom. We do have a couple members who have been able to transition into tertiary education, and of course we're really proud of when that is possible. And so, we're learning just like anyone else how to best support our, members who are autistic and to help them to feel more included in our society, but also to help them become better self-advocates, because that's what I would love to see in the future, not me here as a PRO, but as more autistic people becoming self-advocates, being able to speak to their own needs and being able to say, this is what I want.
But you were here as the PRO, and we want to thank you for your presence, Public Relations Officer of the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago, Soo Hon. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you for joining us.